G'day, welcome. I'm sorry for that. I was actually more organized than I've ever been for a live session. But g'day, I'm Stephen Travers. We seem to have the signal and it's working, so that's great. So tonight's discussion is all about drawing trees and foliage and tree and foliage related subjects. Now, I did a poll through my community page that you may or may not have seen. In the last 10 hours, over 700 people voted, and I had the results written here. Here it is. I lost them in all that kerfuffle. And I asked, what was the most difficult thing about drawing trees that you found? And there were four options. The first option was the leaves, and 32% of the 730 people said that leaves were the most difficult part to draw. Trees and branches, that was 13%. Trees in the landscape, and this was my surprise, trees in the landscape was 50%. So half the people said that the biggest problem they had with trees was trees in the landscape. And I don't know if that's I presume it's this sort of thing. When you have a lot of trees in the one place. So that was 50% of people. And the other one, 5%, were trees are easy. So in other words, of the 730 people who responded, they said that trees weren't a problem for them. So 95% of the people who saw that quiz responded in some way with trees were difficult for them. And if you haven't, hi there, Mandy, and look, welcome to Pamri and to Alihan too. Thank you. And look, if you haven't told me where you're from, who you are, I always really enjoy seeing that on the chat. I'm old enough to be astounded that people all around the world can tune in together and so easily listen to what we're doing. So thanks, Mandy. And please hit the like button if you're finding this helpful. So yeah, so only 5% of people responded with they don't have a problem with trees, and a third of them, basically the leaves were the problem. Half of them, trees in a bigger landscape was the problem, and 13% branches. So if you're some of the people who responded to that, then really appreciate that. But are trees a joy or a frustration for you? And I suppose in my experience, that it's probably a minority of people who find drawing trees a joy. Fortunately for me, I am, but it wasn't always the case. And I hope to explain a little bit of my journey and how that actually sort of, I think, put me on a very, very helpful track in my own development of firstly understanding and then drawing trees. But I want to also explain why I think trees are actually an amazing, and all things foliage, whether it's grass or plants or shrubs, whatever, they're an amazing vehicle, I think, for sharpening, for improving, for lifting the level of our understanding of the whole drawing process. So when we do that, the benefit of that flows into everything we draw. I really believe, and I hope you can hang around. If you can't hang around right now, then come back afterwards and hear the full session, because I want to go on to explain a bit later how I think if we understand, I think a very helpful way of drawing trees and understanding foliage, that that we can overflow this into whatever we draw. And certainly in my case, it raised how I drew, I think, to a much greater level of sophistication. I mean, this is the drawing I was doing, sort of the freehand architectural drawings, and you can see a few hints of foliage there. But this was I was doing before my thinking was developed with foliage. And when I finished, this was how my drawings were looking. Now, it's not about the foliage here, but it's the benefit, I think, to the whole drawing, to the drawing process, that came from a shift in my understanding that showed itself, I think, in even in architecture. So, but I think while the benefit goes past trees and foliage, I actually think that it's easiest to understand in the context of leaves. So we'll get to there. Hi, Nishith. Nish from Mumbai, welcome. And Sheffield, thank you for coming. Like drawing trees, even if they don't come out precisely right. I mean, trees can be a little more forgiving than, say, architecture. If we get the perspective wrong, it's often all too clear. So please join me, and I would love to hear your experiences. Just in the chat is great. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat as well. I think I mentioned the like button. Really appreciate that. And if you do watch this later, then please give us your comments about your tree drawing experience. So let's get into this. Now, firstly, when I talk about trees, I'm thinking of all things. So I'm thinking of leaves, shrubs, branches, trunks, groves of trees, groups of trees, landscapes of trees, grass, plants, potted plants. All of these things really come into this, and I think can benefit immediately from what I'm saying. And all of these things, I think, are pretty difficult. And I look at a lot of drawings, both on social media, but also with my drawing students. And what I've noticed is that so often the trees, the foliage, the plants, whatever, the grass, especially the grass, is the weak spot in the overall drawing. Even if you sort of come into drawing because you like drawing architecture, so many trees, so many buildings, so many drawing scenes, street scenes have got trees in them somewhere. And even if they're the support act and not the main event of our drawing, I mean, if I'm watching a play and the support actors are no good, then it kind of pulls away from what the lead is doing, no matter how good they are. And it's like that with our drawings. We really want to make sure that all the elements, even the ones that aren't super obvious or aren't the first things you see or aren't the main impact, but they all support and work in to the overall scene that we have. And therefore they add in some way. I have a whole lot of drawings here. So, I mean, look, I think this is, so the architecture here is still the main event. This, it's actually the porch of a railway platform in Sydney Central Station, which was used for coffins coming in. So it was a mortuary station. But the foliage here, the trees here, they're not the main event. The star is the architecture, and yet they're an incredibly important part of the overall effect of the scene. And so we want them to work well. It would have been hard to have drawn the architecture if we couldn't, in some way, even semi-effectively capture the leaves. So I'll just pop that over there. So it's really worthwhile, even if drawing trees isn't our kind of main focus, it's incredibly helpful to work at that, because plant, leaf, blades of grass, things are everywhere. Okay. And most of my drawing students and others make comments about how difficult the trees are. So if that's you, and I'd love to hear in the chat, if that's you, I hope this helps us step through. And can I say also, I do have a playlist. I have a lot of videos now, so it can be hard to navigate them. So please look at my playlist, and I do have a drawing trees playlist, which I think has about 70 videos on it now, but it's easy enough to see what are trees and what are other things. And the thumbnail will usually show you what the subject is. There'll be a picture of the scene that's being demoed. So you'll be able to see whether it's grass or a shrub or a garden or an enormous gum tree. So that might be helpful. So why is drawing trees particularly so difficult? I've got two reasons I want to give, and I think it's incredibly helpful to understand these for when we go on to look at how do we address these, okay? Now, the first is that most of us who are drawing as adults, we have drawn as children. And if we go right back to our kindergarten era, I'm just trying to find a pen. I should, and a bit of paper. Scrap. I've got so much paper here. And we go back to kindergarten, and if we didn't draw at home, and we might have, but if we didn't, then we almost certainly drew at school, and at some point we probably saw trees being drawn in this way, and we began to draw them that way, or maybe a bit of a variation. Maybe we added some little bumps around the circle to make it look more realistic. But this was the sort of thing we did. We weren't really drawing a tree, and we wouldn't have understood it this way. But really, what we've done is we've adopted a symbol that represents a tree. So all of us as 4 or 5 year olds, we kind of all agree that this is how you draw a tree, and that's the trunk, and this is the leaf canopy on top. And in some ways, it's a highly simplified version of how some trees look. Not particularly Australian trees, but European trees. And in the books that kids often read, the storybooks or the comics, or certainly the cartoons that we often watched as kids, the drawings of trees usually had more in relation looking like this than anything that's realistic. So I think that's where we start with our tree drawing, these symbols or hyper simplifications, and they're very much an outline of simple shapes. Hi there, Padhai and Natraj and Don from Connecticut. Welcome everyone. Okay. As I said, at school, we tend to copy each other, Oh, so that's how you draw a tree. Oh, that's how you draw a house. Oh, that's how you draw smoke out of a chimney. Oh, that's how you draw the sun. So it's not surprising that these symbols rapidly multiply in all the kids' drawings. And then it becomes very reinforced because they're all drawing them the same way. And sometimes we haven't, you still paint them that way, Ian. That's okay if it's deliberate, of course. That's fine if we're adopting a naive view. But if we're wanting to have a sense of realism that goes beyond this kind of symbolic or abstracted sense, then we that's not really going to work for us, is it? Now, the next problem we have with trees is that we understand them too well. We actually understand them better than many subjects that we draw. And that's because, again, growing up, trees for most of us, at least somewhere in our environment, are there. Often they're everywhere. And we climb them, we see them, we climb them, and sometimes we fall out of them. But we know their makeup. We know you've got often this big trunk, and then it branches into big branches, and then those branches branch into branches. And we know, even if it's not a tree that loses its leaves in winter, in the cold months, we know that there's masses of tiny twigs on the ends, and we know that there's masses of leaves on the ends of the twigs. And so, like, we understand the enormous complexity, the overwhelming detail, the uncountable number of parts in a tree. We know that, even more than we understand most subjects. So when it comes to drawing them, and we see a photo of a tree, we know what's involved there. We look at that canopy and we go, how do I draw this? Now, it's compounded by another hangover from our childhood. So let's just go back to we're back in kindergarten and we're drawing things. And I talked about how we draw highly simplified things, highly simplified symbolic things. Okay. But as well as that, it's not just that we do that, but partly, I think, because a lot of what we see are cartoons. Now, cartoons are basically a simplified outline of shapes and objects. And for most of us, and this includes myself, my first drawing experience was actually copying cartoons from comic books. I'd love to hear on the chat, if for anyone, was that your first drawing experience? Was it copying comics? Now, with my age, the cartoons I copied were Donald Duck, Scrooge McDuck. I particularly loved because the thought of such wealth really stirred my little heart about being able to buy whatever I wanted. But Bugs Bunny cartoons, Daffy Duck, Richie Rich. I think I liked all the rich people cartoons. That says something, doesn't it? And so again, we're drawing lines, we're drawing outlines around things an awful lot. So that's how we start to feel about drawing. Now, as an adult, we come to draw. And if I go back to this early drawing of mine, perhaps the subjects become more complicated. Perhaps the subjects become more complicated, but there's still this heavy focus on lines, outlines, shapes. And I think this is possibly why buildings are often a fairly popular drawing subject, because they are geometric shapes, and we can draw lines around these shapes. And if we get the angles right and join them together well, then we can get something that looks quite accurate, particularly if we can get the perspective angles correct. That looks quite credible. That really says it's quite clear what this is. And so we can get this very heavy line-centric, outline-centric focus that has, I think, a very heavy look. And if you go back and look at my very first YouTube videos, besides the fact that I sit behind a desk and look very dressed up and look very stiff and wooden and perhaps apprehensive, because I was, you'll find that my drawings look more like this. Now, I was happy with this at the time, and in lots of ways it was accurate, but I hadn't developed my way of thinking, my understanding of what the drawing process was. And I was still thinking that the purpose of it was to copy my reference as accurately as I can. And the success of my drawing would be shown by how accurate the drawing was. Now, because of working with trees, trying to draw trees, because I absolutely love trees, I came to realize the shortcomings of this way of thinking, and I adopted a different way of thinking at first, just with trees. But that eventually went on to overflow into all subjects. But as I said, the problem is, when I think this is how I draw outline shapes, what do I do with a tree? What do I think of when I draw a tree? This isn't the absolute best setup. I'm just trying to, but like, this is the problem. I know what leaves look like, but I know there's hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of them on a given tree. And so if my idea of drawing is that I outline the shapes, what do I do knowing how many leaves there are on a tree? What often happens is something like this. And it rapidly evolves into this kind of like swirly thing like this. Now, come on, be honest. Does anyone still draw leaves this way, or have you drawn it that way? G'day there, Joe. Northern VA, Virginia, is it? Is that Virginia? I thought Vermont first, but there's no A in Vermont. So, or Vancouver. No, that's a town. That's a city, isn't it? You'll have to tell me what VA is. My guess is Virginia, though. So yeah, and of course, what happens is this gets very tedious to do, and so it often ends up getting kind of thinner because we just get bored doing it. And what this is our understanding of how leaves look. The fact that we draw in our mind, even without realizing, is by outlining shapes, we get overwhelmed with leaves, and we kind of descend into this swirl in that almost becomes just like a spiral scribble. And we get something that at the end looks more like a pattern than anything else. And patterns end up looking very two-dimensional. It's almost like we had a sheet of paper that had this scribble on it, and we cut out the tree canopy shape, if you like, and stick the pattern, and then we just put some sticks to represent the trunks and the branches. And it doesn't really relate to anything that we're seeing in our reference. Does this make sense to anyone? Hi there, Smitha. Glad you could join us again. Welcome. Good to see you again. Well, see you there. And Christopher, Good day. Well, it's good evening to me. It's Sunday night here, 5 to 9, Sunday night in Sydney, Australia. So my weekend's finished, but I hope you have fun in the rest of yours. Yeah, so that's our problem. We understand trees too much, and the way we've developed of drawing trees and understanding the drawing process, because of its cartoon origins in our childhood and drawing outlines and drawing shapes, it doesn't work for trees. And I think this is the problem. Is this, I was going to say, is this ringing a bell for anyone? Mandy says, yes, this is so relatable. For anyone who does really struggle with drawing trees, do you feel like this is describing perhaps why the path you've been on hasn't worked well at all with foliage? I would love to have a little more feedback, but thanks, Mandy. And please hit the like button for me if you're finding this interesting, and hope that it will continue to be perhaps more interesting further down. And just remember, also, I do have a playlist on trees and foliage. And so, yeah, that's a way of finding my videos that just are on this. Zanu, I've really helped them improve their art, and reason to start drawing buildings with confidence. Great. Love to hear that. Teacher in me always loves to hear those comments. So let me explain how I went personally from very much an outline mindset to a change in how I thought, and develop more, I think, sophistication in my marks, and in therefore the sorts of results I was able to get. Smith is just saying, I've addressed a very important point. Never thought of it this way. I've been using my style of tree drawing recently. Great. Okay. Well, let me tell you, my breakthrough for drawing trees actually came from painting trees. Because while most people start perhaps with drawing rather than painting, I actually started with oil painting. I painted in oils for 10 years before I began to draw anything. And the subject I started drawing was trees, because like many of you, I'd done art in high school, and then as an adult, well, life got busy, and I guess I got what's the word to put it? Well, I'd probably say I had a few issues. Is probably the kindest way to say it. But I really was, I think, kind of paralyzed at thinking I may not be any good, and not, I found it very hard to start things if I couldn't be sure they were going to succeed, and all of that kind of rubbish. And I also got busy with life and doing other stuff. But I would sit on bumper to bumper traffic on the motorways for 20 years, looking at the light coming through the canopies, absolutely loving the visual impact, and thinking, how would you paint that? And then when I did start painting, I was 50 before I started painting. But when I did start painting, I realized that, like, I have a thick paintbrush. I can't draw the leaves with a paintbrush. What I'm doing is I'm having to sit back and see the tree canopy as a series of surfaces. Now, if it's like one big tree, such as this, then it's a series of undulations sort of in and out. And a lot of European trees are like this. Now, however, in Australia, gum trees don't particularly look like that. Our gum trees look often more like this, where the canopy is much sparser and we have bunches. And this is actually like a highly stylized drawing I did for a very early video, but just showing like the basic structure of a gum tree such as that. Not necessarily the shape of the tree or the branches or anything like that, but just the fact that we've got clusters of foliage in kind of clumps that are in various relationships to each other. And when the light hits them, it causes shadows in different ways. So, some parts of the clumps are in shade rather, because they're facing away from the sun. But other parts have shadow cast on them from clumps that are higher up. And that creates a darker effect because shadow is darker than shade. I have a video on that if you want to Google that. It's really important to understand the difference between shade and shadow because it's a wonderful kind of subtlety we can introduce into our drawings, into our value hatching, if we understand it. But this is sort of how it looks sort of in drawings of gum trees. So I came to realize that, okay, when I see a photo, even if I can see the individual leaves, as you often can, depending how far away you are, I was thinking, but I can't draw the individual leaves. And really, when I look at the photo, or even when I look at a tree in life, unless I'm very close, I'm more aware of the overall pattern of light and dark on the whole canopy, if it's basically a big canopy, or on the various parts of it, if it's now sometimes with some trees, it's a bit different. Like it does depend on what we're looking at, but that it's still the overall effect of the leaves and the lights and darks that I see. And when I painted, I wasn't trying to do anything except capture the effect of light and dark and color, color with the values of light and dark. That's what I was trying to do. And I realized when I began to draw, I drew with pencil before I drew with pen, but I didn't you can use a pencil and you can shade, you can kind of rub the side of the graphite on the paper and get like dark, blurry parts. But even with pencil, I was wanting to draw with line. So I used a mechanical pencil. So I drew hatching to represent that. And so that was still my method. So when I switched to pen, I could still develop that method more. And that's basically what I did. I mean, and it works for different scales. Now, this is sort of an early drawing. Now, this isn't a tree. This is just a small bunch of shrubs that are kind of growing from a single point. This was just on the side of a motorway when we stopped to use some public facilities. And I just like the shadows, and I like the play of stems of the tree down here. But you can see what I've done. I've not got bogged down in drawing leaves. I've tried to capture the shadows, but in doing that, I do need to be aware of what the effect of the shape of the leaves and how they hang on the tree and in different parts of the tree are. So for the same bush, the effect is often very different if say, as in a eucalypt, the leaves hang down. And so across the top of the canopies, it's often a relatively smooth effect. But where they hang down, the leaves are different shapes, and we get more a toothy, jagged effect on the lower part of these bunches of foliage, if you can see what I mean. And in Australian trees, that's really important. But sometimes even now this is in Australia, but I don't think it's an Australian tree. But you can see that again, like down the bottom, this is very much a broadleaf tree. Here we go. Here down the bottom, I have actually hinted at some either individual leaves or at just a small number of leaves together to give a sense, because there are two main ways I think we understand a tree. One is from the play of light and dark on the tree, and that often tells us a lot of things. But the other is from the silhouette edge. Silhouette edges in any drawing subject are really important, but in trees they are very important because we get information potentially on the size of the tree. So if we can see individual leaves, that tells us that that tells us either that we're very close to the tree or it's not a very big tree. And if we can't see the individual leaves and we don't make any marks that could be mistaken for them, then that starts to indicate that this is a very large tree, even if we don't have a lot of other clues, or cues is probably a better word, in the scene that make the size clear. That's why it's often good to have a person or something, a fence, something that helps give an indication onto the size of the tree. And I don't know if you haven't seen this video of mine, this is on the tree list, but I did this video looking at exploring different marks that we can use to represent different foliage. And I basically just went through my drawings and found ones that had different trees in them and just copied. So we can have some where virtually we are drawing leaves because the scene is very, very close up, and we're seeing the leaves in detail. Or it might be a plant where with this recent drawing you might have seen this agave plant. It might be a plant where the leaves are large, and it's we draw them all basically. So it just depends on the sort of tree that we're drawing. But the thing is, we need to explore the different marks that create the effect of that foliage in life, and that's how we end up drawing trees that look differently. And I think this drawing may have gone with that video as well. This is actually a drawing from down the road where all of these trees were together in this camera shot. Smitha, I honestly can't tell you right now, but if you go to my playlist and tree playlist and scroll down, you'll see this in the thumbnail, so it's really easy and quick to find. But yeah, all of these trees are great next to each other this closely. And you can see how, because I've been looking at each of them and thinking, now visually, what's the overall effect? Is it spiky? Is it soft? Is it light? Is it dark? Is it opaque? Is it see-through? Can I see through the foliage because it's very sparse? Or how blocky is it? Am I seeing it as positive or negative space? And that becomes important down here too. All of these things. And then what marks on the paper? You see, I'm not thinking about lines. I'm not thinking about outlining the tree, not even outlining the canopy. And if you can imagine, say, this tree, the middle tree, which is reasonably solid, if I'd done a heavy line, basically tracking around the outside of that, how much less realistic that would look than the effect I've generated by not drawing lines, but by positioning marks on each other, over each other. Okay, that makes sense, does it? Okay, I just look at a few comments. Nico, your channel has been a great help. Thank you for all the lessons. I thank you, darling. I did have a glass of water. Thank you. My dear wife. It's pretty cold here in Sydney, as you might have been able to guess by her coat, her blue woolly sheep coat. Smith is saying, I painted trees like that in high school. I thought of using that style in sketching. Yeah, well, it was that painting experience that led me to begin to draw the trees. And as I began to draw them with the pencil originally, but the mechanical pencil, so it was by line, I remember thinking, this is how I painted trees. Yeah, this works for this. It was actually a very conscious appropriation of the technique that I used with the trees, with that big oil painting that I just showed you before. And so I very consciously was able to adapt that, and it was very effective in drawing trees. And I realized that I didn't have any real problem in capturing the feel of the trees with this starting point. I mean, I think I became better at doing it, but my understanding of the process and of what I was trying to do didn't really change. I just understood it more deeply and began to do it, I think, more effectively and more easily. And I often say, particularly in the videos where I just talk to camera down in the backyard, I often talk about the understanding process, that what happens in our head, because what we do with our hands flows from what we think. What we think comes from the framework that we understand things in, how we understand the objects that we're seeing, how we understand the observation process, and how we understand how we actually create the tree on the paper with the pen, with a black line, and a black line is not an obvious medium to use to, I should have had a picture of I mean, to draw this. We can't, what do we outline? Even if we outline the trees, they're going to look crazy. What do we outline? How, maybe we can outline those dark trees in the front, and we can maybe outline the path, and we can probably outline the figures, but how do we outline all that foliage further in there? Well, by thinking marks, this is how I outlined it. I mean, every single one of these photos, drawings, is a video that shows the demo, and I talk through the process for that scene in particular. Now, this wasn't so much about drawing the trees even, but about capturing the light effects. And this is why I say that this way of thinking of trees and of foliage ended up overflowing into so many other areas of my drawing, because this now wasn't teaching me about just drawing trees and just capturing the effects of trees, but this began to teach me about dealing with values, drawing with a pen, and manipulating values by where I put my marks, and values are simply lights and darks, by where I put my darks, where I layered them, and just as importantly, where I didn't put them. Because a lot of the effect comes from leaving the white spaces. And this was, I think, the drawing I did pretty much after that last one, because I enjoyed playing around with that so much. But one of my most recent drawings, again, it's all leaves and trees and vegetations. I think I've developed that this one looks a bit heavy-handed now. I feel like there's more subtlety in this now, but it didn't take me any longer to draw. They both took about an hour to draw. And I'm finding that what I've been learning, I keep developing in my head, and it becomes easier to, I think, achieve more in it, because the way of understanding it works. It works. And I mean, I tell you over and over again in my videos, make sure you critique your drawings. Make sure you look at them at the end. Make sure you work out what disappointed you in some way, because it hasn't worked as well as you wanted, because that's your focus in the next drawing. Now, it may be a focus that says, I got to try a different technique. Or it might be a focus that says, I rushed that bit, I can see it now. Or it might be a focus that said, if I did this bit first, it would have been worked better. Or it might simply be a focus that says, I went too dark too quickly, and then I couldn't make the adjustments because I couldn't take the ink off the paper later. So if I go a bit lighter earlier, then I can leave the darkest parts till later, and that will give me more control to create the effect I want at the end. But however our critiquing ends up working, it gives us the focus for the next drawing. And I certainly still do that with every single drawing that I do. And I think it shows, because it means every drawing I do, and I draw a lot now with everything I'm doing, so I get lots to practice. But every drawing I do has a focus that's a very specific focus that works at improving my skills in the subjects I draw, the way I draw them. And it can work, it will work that way for you as well. G'day, Ernie. Spider-Man and Venom were your first copy drawings. Yeah, I did read them, but although Superman was my kind of human, well, sort of human superhero. Red Angry Bird, I like to paint and draw people and animals, not much of landscapes. Yeah, and that's fair enough. But you draw people and animals, and you probably end up with plants or foliage. I mean, this drawing of a parrot in Australia, a female king parrot. Yeah, birds often have a context of trees. They like to sit in trees, a lot of them. And if you'd seen, you can probably imagine the photo that I drew this from, and there was a bit of detail, but there was a lot of kind of like just blah, blah, blah foliage that kind of all blurred together. So how do I draw that? Because even if I could draw it in detail, you wouldn't have noticed the bird for all the foliage detail. I still wanted the bird to be the main thing and not the foliage. And this is where looking at our reference and thinking, what's the effect of what I'm seeing and how can I capture that effect? And you can see that a lot of it is on lights and darks. And for some of the things down the bottom here, I actually highlight some leaves or stems or grasses through negative space, through the shadows, the dark spaces between the blades of grass, or between the weeds they are actually. This bird was eating some self-sown cherry tomatoes that had grown up in the front lawn. And the front lawn looks like that. But yeah, so I'm looking at my reference and I'm thinking, excuse me, I turned my heater off here so that it wasn't making too much noise. And I'm thinking, what marks will capture the effect? I'm not thinking, how can I outline any shapes? Not even the bird. I'm thinking, I look at the bird, I look at everything, and I'm thinking, what marks will capture the visual effect? Now, I'm not a slave to my photo, and you've possibly heard me say over and over again, why seek to have a copy of the photo as your aim? Excuse me. I already have the photo. I'm not going to draw a better photo than this. What I have the challenge to do, but also the opportunity to do, is to create a drawing springboarding from this. But I can tweak this to take advantage of the, if you like, advantages of drawing that photos don't have, to actually improve on this in my drawing. And I think that's always the challenge. When we start drawing, because drawing something that looks accurate is such a focus, and it's not a bad one to have, especially as kids when we start to draw, but we start to see that as the goal. And as we develop our drawing, I think it's a very limiting goal to have, that we can actually learn better, more greatly, by trying to go beyond it and trying to improve on that. As I said, we already have the photo. I'm not going to draw a better photo. I'm going to do a drawing. So let me draw the best drawing I can creatively think from the photo. And it comes from, looking at the visual effect and thinking, what marks can I use a black pen on my paper to create this effect? And oh dear, I've got so many bits of paper here now. Here it is. And this was my interpretation of the values here, trying to create those values with a black pen to create an effect where the overall effect created the scene that I love so much in a way that's that I'm able to use, that I'm able to do using a pen. But if I was thinking of shapes and outlines, where would I have started? But thinking of, how does this look? What's the overall effect? How can I capture that effect? By thinking effect, suddenly it's a whole new ballgame. Suddenly I'm looking at lights and darks, and I'm not thinking of trees. I'm thinking of three-dimensional forms. Sometimes I'm thinking of shape. Sometimes I'm thinking of hard edge, but a lot of the time I'm thinking of soft edges, but I'm particularly thinking of silhouette edges. And so if you look at these fir trees, I think they are close up, you'll see that I've paid more attention to capturing the silhouette of those fir trees, because that gives us a lot of information visually about what those are. And so, but it gets very different as we move further back, because the visual effect changes of what we see as things move further back. And I had a little thing here that, oh gosh, did it get buried? That I kept to, here it is. Now, don't worry about this. This was for another video, but that was for a few things. It was on drawing depth, but it was, I mean, if you just, these are highly simple. Like here we have our kindergarten lollipop trees, drawn with a little more sophistication, but with the same simple form. But I just kept this in one piece to one place to show you that the way we put our marks on the paper changes according to the distance that we're viewing our object from. And it's not so much what we do with one, but it's the relative it's the relative difference when we have more than one. So it's how I draw this middle one, having already drawn this one, or having already drawn this one down here. Can you see what I'm saying? That we change the way we draw the foliage according to the distance something is. And I mentioned at the start of this that I'd done this poll on my that I have on my community page. I did a poll on what do you find most difficult to draw about trees, and the leaves were 32%, trees and branches 13%. 5% of people don't have a problem drawing trees, but 50% said trees in the landscape. And I think that is this kind of thing. That is this kind of thing. Because in the landscape, distance is so much more important. If I'm just doing, if you're like a specimen tree, well, the whole tree is basically the same distance, or it could be. But if I'm drawing a scene where depth of plane is significant, now sometimes it might be like a landscape such as this, where in some ways the size of the trees tells us something about the distance away that they are. And this was actually, that was what this was about. If we look at this side, we can see that, yeah, look, you'd guess that this tree was closer, that tree not so close, and that tree was furthest away. But it could just be they're planted almost next to each other, or they're growing into each other. It's just that they're different sizes because they're planted at different times. We don't really know so much. But with this second group of 3 trees, it's really clear that visually, because of the way we've created the effect, the visual effect, that some of them look further away. And it's not just because they're smaller in size as over this one, but because we've changed the way we've applied the marks to capture the changes in how something looks, looking through more atmosphere to see it. When we look at objects further away, we're having to look through more air to see them. And the air, as it becomes more and more, it affects the light waves and our perception of light, and therefore colour. And so the yellows tend to disappear because that has a shorter spectrum or something, the shorter waves. No. I didn't finish science at school. But the blues have a longer, and that's why mountains appear blue further away, because the yellows desaturate from our perception as things get further away. But also we don't see things with as much clarity, and we don't see things therefore with the same hardness of edge or the same detail. And so if I work to capture that effect in my drawing, then this is a really wonderful example about drawing the effect of detail, not drawing the detail we see. Because in the photo, it's quite possible that I can see as much detail with this middle tree as this tree, but I choose not to show it because I want to create the effect of depth. So I might exaggerate it because cameras actually capture more detail and more color than we see and we perceive as well. And so I need to put the depth back in the drawing that the camera has lost. And again, this is where we can easily improve on the drawing. Look, there's just a few more comments here. Smither, I've made my first full drawing from a photo last week, and everyone was amazed by this new style of art. Really great. When you say it's not very common here, where is here? What country are you in, Smither? It's all thanks to my videos. Well, thank you. Please tell them. The model shadows came out nicely. Thank you. From Brisbane. Hey, Red Angry Bird. Hi there, Lee. Good to see you again, or hear from you again. Hi from Anita Roy from Brazil. And a long time ago, I stopped trying to draw accurately. It's a wonderful release, Ernie, isn't it? It's wonderful when we suddenly get that pressure off us, that we have to be that the success of our drawing is the exactness And when I first began in my videos to say draw the effect of detail, it was draw the effect of detail, not the detail. And look, I actually came across this partly because I don't know if any of you know me from Instagram. Let me just grab one of my Instagram drawings. There's a whole lot of them here. Oh, here's one. They're all like this. Now, they're not freehand, so I'm not pretending they are. I have a reference photo and I use a 4x4 grid on the photo, on the paper, pencil underdrawing that I then ink over, and then I erase the pencil underdrawing. So they're not freehand. I don't pretend that they are, and they're not my photos. They're Paris photographers who gave me permission to draw from their photos, because otherwise it would have been a copyright infringement. So someone's just asking about foliage with markers, so I've just got that. Yeah, but I actually began to use this idea of drawing the effect of the detail instead of the detail with the architecture. And I didn't even realize I was sort of doing that. But I began to get all these comments on Instagram saying, oh, I love your detail, Stephen. I love your detail. I'm amazed at your detail. But, when I zoomed in to look at the detail, it wasn't there. And this is how I actually did begin to start to think of, I'm just sort of just getting the feel of the detail, not the exactness of it. And so again, this was like an echo from my immediate past, before I began doing the YouTube drawings, that came in and became part of the flow of understanding into my mind as to what the drawing process is and how it works and how it's working for me. And I found then it began to overflow out into every subject area I drew, because it was just as helpful in every area. But I think was it Smither who Lee asked about drawing with markers. This is a line drawing of a tree in Vienna, and there's a marker drawing of the same. And so basically, I've created the values with the pen and with hatching. With markers, I use different pens, different markers. These are all neutral grey Copic, but a range of values from, probably a 0 to I think 5's probably the darkest I've used there. It shows up a little bit darker on camera. So I don't have many tree videos, but I do have this one if you want to watch it, Lee. Goofy all the way. I drew Goofy and Pluto and all of those guys. Huey, Dewey, and Louie. I drew those. Jana from Sweden. Hey, welcome. The wise wizard. Well, I'm certainly old enough. Prosit, is that a cartoon character? Mandy, you've retracted your message about why do I have such empty walls with all these paintings around. I don't know, you tend to take them for granted. That one was, I think, on the other wall here, and then I took it down to use an example. It's too hard to put back up, so it's on the floor now. I've got a few around the house, but all the good ones I've sold. I had exhibitions and I sold them. So, some of the ones I didn't mind having used, and a few of them that are nice that haven't sold are at the kids' houses. So may as well put them to some use, eh? Smith, I'm from India, right? Even I've never seen pen sketching before I found. Oh, really? Okay. Barbara from Maine, USA. I love your channel. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Good. And look, please, if my channel's helpful for you, if this is helpful, please hit the like button right now before you forget, if you haven't already, and let your friends know. The YouTube algorithm looks very, very favorably when you share a video to someone. So if you know people who draw and you come across one of my videos that you think would be helpful for what and how they draw, then please share the link with them. And that's a way of helping me hopefully as much as I've helped you. So that would be good. Okay. So the better mindset is to understand the drawing process as not trying to draw the shapes that we see And of course, shapes is very two-dimensional. A square is a shape, but it's to see the form. And, a shape is a circle. The form is the sphere. To see the form, but not just to see the form, but to see the effect that the light has on how we see it, the effect that the distance we're from creates, the effect that other things around it, because how we see one thing is in relation to the things around it, like that group of 3 trees. And so how we draw one will depend on how we draw another and how we maybe draw another. And so we need to get them in sync in terms of how we manipulate whatever effects we're trying to capture, so that we maintain the sense of distance between the 3, that we maintain the sense of trees moving further away from each other, because we've changed not just the lightness, we've changed not just the thickness of the pen, but we've actually changed the marks that we use to capture the effect of different parts of the tree, of the same part of the tree, but on different trees. Does this might think? No, of course I didn't think it was rude. I just hadn't got to it yet, Mandy. I thought you had thought I was offended or something, and that's why I wanted to mention it, just to make sure you didn't. Gosh, I used to be a high school teacher in a tough part of Sydney, decades ago. You couldn't even think of things that could be as offensive as things that they said to me then. I had all these students then who didn't want to be in the same room as me, and so this is really nice. Nazro, I draw exactly my style. Look, I actually don't use Facebook anymore, I'm afraid. Just Instagram, because I just couldn't cope with all of the social media and all of the connections and things. And we talked about the landscape before. As I said, if you haven't, maybe when this finishes or when you leave, if you go to my community page, I think it's the last post, is this quiz that's about what part of drawing do you find hardest, and drawing trees do you find the hardest. And it's actually 50% when I looked is drawing the tree in the landscape. That really surprised me. I only put that as an I was just trying to think of another thing to put in, and that's actually the thing that causes challenges. And because again, it depends on the scale. See, people sort of say, oh, how do you draw this? What's the way of drawing this? If you're asking that question, I say this at the risk of being offensive. If you're asking that question when you draw, how do I draw a tree? How do I draw the foliage? That's the wrong question. I think that's showing that you need to let your understanding of the process become a little less sort of childhood driven, and embrace perhaps a more sophisticated way of thinking, because the idea of shape and outline is very limiting. Now, it's part of what we have. It's part of how we draw. There's nothing wrong with focusing on line and shape with some subjects under some conditions, but it's limiting if that's all we're thinking. But when we think mark, we have so many more things, if you like, tools. If I think of every possible mark I can create with a pen as a tool I can put on the paper, I have so many more tools if I'm thinking marks rather than lines. So here we have 2 scenes of trees in the landscape. But this one, I wanted to show this one first. I'm no good with this flipped kind of thing. But this one, although the trees aren't really close, they're a lot closer. Even the furthest ones are a lot closer than in this scene, where we have trees in the landscape as well. And if you look at the marks I've put on the paper to create those trees, it's a very different technique and process to the marks I've put on the paper to create these ones. The other thing to realize is, if you look at this, look at these vertical lines in the distance, okay? If I were to just cut, a centimetre square out of there and show that to you, or probably better, have a blank sheet of paper with a hole cut out and cover it all except for a very small amount, you wouldn't be able to tell what the drawing was from those marks, because those marks only had meaning with the overall context of all the marks put together. Because part of what lets me understand these as trees in the distance is the marks I've used to create this large tree in the foreground, and so forth. And so it's another really important consideration that it's not like, oh, this is how you draw a tree. But if you want to draw a tree here, then these marks are a way you could capture that effect. And these marks are marks you could use to capture the effect of a tree in the foreground, in the distance, as long as you've created the effect of a tree closer in a more involved way that we can use to kind of understand what's happening. One of my personal favorite drawings, he said, now he can't find it. I thought it was just along here. Well, it was here earlier. Oh, well, never mind that. Here's another foliage one. Now, look at this. Now, I feel this makes sense when you look at it, that we're looking into a section of the Australian bush, and this is how it looks. It's a tangle of stuff. But you can make out some things very clearly because I have focused on edge and outline for these branches that are really close. And down here in these clumps of grass, I have focused on line a lot because that's the line is, in this case, a good way to capture the visual effect of these clumps of grass that kind of are large and clumpy, and they catch shadow in a certain way, and we can see elements coming towards us and across to the sides, in that kind of clumping, flopping out way. But those marks are very different to the marks I use for different types of plants. And when we have a lot of different plants together, this is when it's really important to work out different marks to capture, the effect. We're coming back to this video I have on my trees playlist that looks at different marks for different types of trees. Because different types of trees have a different visual effect. So the same marks don't work in the same drawing, at least for a lot of different trees. We need to create marks that help us to see the distinction between. And sometimes we see that through positive space, such as in this dark small tree here. But if you look at this clumping grass, we understand the clumping grass both because of the shadows down here, but also because whatever shrubby stuff, grassy stuff is behind has darkness that this grass coming up is highlighted against. And so sometimes we create the effect not by drawing the object, but by drawing shadows behind or to the side. And so, how do you draw a bush scene? It totally depends on the bush scene. Totally depends on what we're looking at. And also, as the artist now, from my reference or from what's in front of me, how I want to use that as a starting point. Is there something that from a visual point of view is very dramatic that I can add to or not? If this is interesting, as I said, please hit the like button for me. That would be great. And so it's, we so often want a quick answer with drawing. And I must admit, look, I'm a bit guilty of this if you look at my thumbnails, and some of the titles I've used and some of the things I've said. But it seems to me that so many people, when they start to draw, they're so keen to get to the end before they've started. And it's all about what's the tip, what's the hack, what's the shortcut, what's the way to fast track, what's the way to kind of jump to the end. Let's cut to the chase. Just, what is it that I have to do? How do I, what lines do I put where to have a successful drawing? And it's not that at all. The lines on the paper I reckon are about or the marks on the paper, because I don't say lines anymore. I say marks because it's a far more helpful way of thinking. But the marks on the paper, I think, are about 5% of the process of a successful drawing. You see, if we come back to this one, now when we look at this drawing, the marks are 100% of what we see. And I think this is why we get misled into thinking, well, into rushing to start, because we think the drawing's all about running the pen all over the paper. But how did I know what marks to use and where to put them and how to interpret my photo into marks on? See, the hard thing wasn't really the marks on the paper. The challenge was to understand my reference in a way that I could creatively translate it into marks on the paper and say something that was both understandable, interesting, realistic looking, if that's the style I'm wanting to do. That's the challenge. And that's the 95% that happens in my head and in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30 years of drawing and thinking I've done before this. But don't get discouraged by that, because it's not that 30 years of drawing will improve you. I've only really been drawing in pen for 2.5 years, but I've been drawing intensely and I've been drawing very focused on how can I draw better? And I haven't been using any material. I haven't used any resources. I haven't looked at anyone else's videos. I haven't read any books. I've been looking at my drawings and intensely critiquing them after every drawing and asking, how can I improve? And now I realize that it's not just when I draw a tree that I'm trying to capture the effect of the leaves. When I draw anything at all, I'm trying to capture the visual effect. Everything we see, we perceive with a certain visual effect. And look, and sometimes if it's architecture, it can be very hard-edged and it can be very geometric. And that's okay when that really is the focus of the scene that we want to establish, that we want to kind of bring out in our drawing. But it's not always what we want to do. And it's having the flexibility to be able to do that. Gosh, I think there's more messages being retracted than there are being. You're not going to offend me, don't worry. How to draw thick foliage. Do I have a thick foliage? Oh gosh, gosh, isn't this thick enough? How about this? Is that thick enough? Or how about actually one of my most recent drawings? Now that's very thick foliage. In fact, if there wasn't a tree coming out of the top of it, I'm not sure you'd even know it was foliage. If you know Australian things, that's a callistemon, that's a bottle brush. And this is actually at the entranceway to a railway station near where I live. And again, look at what I've done for the further away foliage up the back, really just vertical hatching, but in a way that kind of clumps areas together visually a bit. And you wouldn't know what they were if the tree and the plant down the bottom weren't there. But because that establishes context, that lets us read the marks up here and give them understanding. But you couldn't just use these marks to draw these trees without the rest of the scene to make clear what they are. And this is why when someone says, how do you draw a tree? Well, it's what tree, how far away is it, and what's around it? Because the visual effect of something is affected by what's around it as well. And it's also affected by what we want to bring out as the main event in our subject. But is that dense enough for you? Down here, this is actually a big clump of grass, and that kind of spirals out from a center point. It's not the most successful part of the drawing, but that's what I was trying to do there. But honestly, when I was drawing this, half the time it felt like an explosion of lines coming out from, like a firework explosion coming out at me. But again, if you look at this, I'm giving more detail, more hard edge, and more detail to the very closest parts of this callistemon that are coming out towards me. And so it's manipulating all of these ways of creating different visual effect that I've kind of developed and just come to understand and become experienced with using in some way to do the best I can. But it's just as important. In fact, maybe it's even harder. I mean, this is a derelict workers' cottage in Hobart. I fear it's about to be pulled down. The windows were actually boarded up, but I took a photo of what it's like behind the boards so that I could draw it because I really liked it. But just look at the weeds in front of it. You know, if I'd drawn those weeds in any more detail, they would have stood out too much and they would have overwhelmed the visual effect they had in life in my drawing. They would have been more obvious in my drawing than they were in life. And unless I want to do that, then I need to work out, I need to pull back on my marks to do enough marks to create a certain effect, but not so much that it looks out of place in the overall context. Does that make sense? No, I didn't teach art at high school. I taught English and history. How's that? But the one good thing about that is that I did art in high school as a student, and I did almost nothing because I was too much of a perfectionist, and I didn't want it. I couldn't bear the thought it wouldn't be really good, so I just used to do nothing. And I spent 30 years doing nothing. Someone's asking, can I bring how to make architecture structure of imaginary structures in your mind? Okay, look, this is actually a topic that I thought about quite a lot recently for a video I did, which focused on drawing from the imagination and what's actually involved in that. And I was particularly interested in that because I don't draw from the imagination, hardly. I mean, sometimes you do. Like sometimes you might, I don't know, I might be doing a scene such as this, and there might be, I don't know, there might be, let's say there was a big post box there that I don't want to put in the scene. So I leave it out, but I have to fill in, but what that space was occupied by, big mailbox. I need to put some trees in, So I kind of do infill from my imagination. But when you think about it, when we draw from a photo, we have a reference in front of us, and then we draw it. The challenge is to observe this carefully enough and in enough detail and to perceive the key visual characteristics of this that we want to capture in our lines in our drawing. But let's say I don't have a photo and I want to draw a drawing of a gnarled old tree trunk that twists and turns and has the light in a certain way, that has an ancient, weathered, almost bowed down feel to it. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from memories that I've placed in my mind. It's a bit like every tree trunk I've seen has, in a sense, become a memory that I have filed away in my memory drawers. And when I want to draw something, such as a tree trunk from my imagination, I rummage in the drawers and I find one or several memories that I think give me enough information to draw. Can I say? And look, I don't draw from the imagination hardly, except in the limited way I said. So I'd love to have some comments on that, whether you think this accurately reflects drawing from the imagination, or if you think you have a different way of understanding that process. I'd love to hear that. But when I look at so many drawings from a photo, people haven't been able to actually observe in a photo that's right in front of them, or if they're drawing from life, from something right in front, haven't been able to sort of understand what that is enough to do a drawing that has any sense of realism. How much harder is it? And the answer is incredibly harder to actually rummage around in our memory and from probably several scenes, trees, or hundreds of trees that we've seen, stitch together enough information accurately enough to capture something that looks real. And I think the biggest problem is that people start to draw from their imagination before they can draw well from a reference, because to draw from our imagination is so much more challenging, because it's the same process, except that I have to look in here rather than on a hard copy or rather than in front of me. so much more demanding. And and if we want to draw well from our imagination, I can't imagine how we can do it without actually working really hard at drawing the subjects we want to draw, firstly from photos, and really nailing our understanding of what are the things I have to see in this to be able to create the drawing I want. Because it's not just outline. It's not just outline. And if you look at this close up, I haven't drawn an outline, because a heavy outline would have created a very two-dimensional sense, and I want a three-dimensional sense. And if I look at this closely, the effect of the bark is that it's kind of a rippled effect down the edges. It's not a smooth straight line. Now, some types of trees might give you a smooth straight line, and in that case, there'd be nothing wrong with using one. But it's not creating the effect that I wanted for this. And as you can see, I haven't drawn straight lines. And like tree trunks and branches have exactly the same problems that leaves have in terms of how we draw them. We're coming from a symbolic kind of trunk and branches. And maybe the biggest problem I see in trees is that the trunk and the lowest branches, these ones that kind of branch off the trunk, are simply too fat to, if you like, thin out and dissipate before the end of the tree canopy. So when we have a tree, we have a certain, we have the trunk down here, and then it splits off, and they all get thinner and thinner until we get the leaves that stick on the very end of the tree. Now, you have to have it, unless the tree's being pruned in some kind of, obvious way. But if it's a relatively naturally grown tree, you have to have enough space from the thickness down here to the tops of the leaves that are on the very top of the twigs. You have to have enough space to dissipate the thickness. And so much of the time, everything disappears into canopy, still very thick, and there's just not enough space. And that's the sort of thing, it's a bit like the perspective angles not being correct in an architectural scene. That's the sort of thing where it's really you may not know what's wrong, but something's not right in that tree. There's something that's not realistic. That isn't what happens in the real world, even if you can't pinpoint what it is. And we don't want that. We want people to look at our drawings totally unself-consciously. It's like if you go to a concert and you're afraid that the singer can't hit the highest notes. It's hard to relax listening to the song if you're afraid that it's going to be a bad note at some stage. It's the same with our drawing. If we have parts that don't work, parts that are awkward, parts that don't line up with reality for that object, that section, whatever it is, then it's hard for someone looking at our drawing to relax with the overall scene, because little things keep going and drawing attention to themselves in an unhelpful way. What we want is everything to feel okay. And so when people look at our drawing, there's nothing saying, oh, this doesn't look right. Instead, they're able to step into the world that we've created in our drawing. When I drew this, what I was hoping would happen was that, people sort of start down here and they travel up the track into the light, because, well, pathways always invite entering up, and light also attracts. Now, of course, I could only draw the light by drawing all the darkness. And I had to be very careful with my line direction and building this darkness up. This was so tedious to draw. This drawing took me 1 hour and 20 minutes to draw. Someone was asking me about how long it takes, which is a very long drawing for me for YouTube videos these days. I used to do videos that took 2 hours to draw, and I had to speed them up so much so that people would watch them that you could hardly see what I was doing. And I thought, well, that's crazy. And so I began to make them smaller so that I could slow down the process and show it more. But let me tell you, this corner was I don't know, a third of the time, and it was really boring and tedious. And I wasn't even sure it was going to work till I'd finished. Like I really didn't know whether it was going to like have that balance between being a dark shadow, but also not just look like a black blob, but to have a sense of this is a shadow that's on a surface, and the surface has grass and whatnot, but the grass is on an undulating ground surface. So I've got this triple thing I'm trying to show in this corner. I'm trying to show the shape of the land underneath because that helps give a sense of this is slightly uphill. I want to capture the sense of there's grasses and other weedy things here, as well as a few rocks. But I also want to capture the sense of the shadow. So I had three things I was trying to draw with marks layering over the top. And for me, where I'm at in my drawing, this is a challenge area. And I really wasn't sure till I'd finished it whether it was going to work. But I knew the effect I was trying to capture. And this was the best way I could think of it. And when I finished it and looked at it and critiqued my drawing, I thought, yeah, oh, that actually worked quite well. And as long as I've got the time to put into it, this is something I could develop in other ways in other areas. But you'll notice that up here, I have a lighter value, even though in the reference it was as dark as down here, because I wanted it to feel further up the hill. And if you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button for me. That would be a tremendous help for me. Let me see. Okay. Trunk is easy. Find tiny branches more difficult. Free from the cage. It's a bit hard when you don't know the names. My tip when you draw branches, and if you look at really any of my tree videos, you'll see this, is I start at the top and I work down. I actually start with I draw a lot of the foliage clumps first without any branches because I want to position those in the right places. And then I start at the top and I draw down. I draw the trunk last. And so as I draw down, I make the branches thicker and thicker. And if it turns out that I need to make a branch a bit thicker than I've drawn it, it's usually easy enough to add an extra line that doesn't look out of place. And so I can thicken the branches or the trunk as I go down if I don't get it quite right the first time. And that's far more adjustable than going the other way, where if I get them too thick, then I've really got nothing except maybe to make the tree twice as tall. But that's not usually an option either. So yeah, I'm sure if you watch this video, you'll see that the first branches I do are these twiggy branches, and then I work down. Okay. On a given day, how much time do I spend on drawing? Look, on a given day, I make 1 or 2 YouTube videos. If I make 2, often one of them is what I call a talk to camera one. So it's where I'm talking more about the philosophy, not the philosophy of drawing, but some of the underlying principles. Or I might talk about things like perfectionism, how I managed to push through my perfectionism and get over it, basically by throwing away the eraser, by deciding to switch to ink so that I couldn't be paralyzed over erasing lines and trying to redraw them more exactly. Every line was going to be there at the end. I had to learn to cope with that and learn not just to cope with it psychologically, but from an art point of view, learn to how do I minimize the impact of lines that aren't as exact as I would have liked in the first case. And I've learned to do that because I had to. And what I've learned is that learning to do that, it's not like some sort of first aid for drawing. It's actually part of the normal drawing process. It's not sort of something, oh, well, if you can't draw properly the first time. No, it's just how it is when we draw. And again, because our drawing is not outlining shapes perfectly, but it's building up a visual effect by many marks. It's amazing how often we can hide marks that aren't quite right with other marks over the top or coming up alongside them or whatever. We have so much flexibility for, if you like, massaging different parts of our drawing to either hide things, but also to bring things out as well. So, yeah. Yeah, does that answer that? What about can't draw from imagination, but from a desaturated black and white photo, I use GIMP a lot. I have no idea what GIMP is. I assume it's some sort of digital art process or program or app or something. Do you want to tell me what GIMP is? But sometimes I actually desaturate too. As in I desaturate, gosh, that sounds terrible. As in I desaturate my reference. So here's something I haven't drawn yet. Oh gosh, these are both I have a color one of this somewhere. A color join of this. That's not it. That's not it. Oh, it's a night scene. And so this is something I've got, as like, part of my kind of, developing and pushing new directions myself. This is a track just near where I live, and it was nighttime, and you really this was a lot darker up the top because the camera but there's a street light down on the bend in this park part. So yeah, as I said, I thought I had a color and black and white, but I do have a color one somewhere. But this is, yeah, sometimes it's very helpful to desaturate, and I think part of the reason is not even so much to copy the black and white one, but to train our understanding of how colors look when we take away the color and we're left with the value. So color and value are two different things. And not that we have to stick with it, because the black and white photo doesn't become, oh, I need to copy this now, but it gives me more information for whatever manipulation I want to do of the scene. As I said, if I do draw that scene, I'm darkening the sky up the top. In fact, I've already put some marker tone over the much lighter, like, gaps between the clumps of foliage, because it was just too bright. And I thought, no, well, that's not the effect I want. And that's the effect of the camera opening up to get as much light as possible in the dark, rather than the scene that I was seeing that I wanted to capture and draw. So I'm having to put back into my photograph the realism that was there in life that I wanted to capture, that the photo hasn't captured, for all the helpful detail it has captured. Does that make sense? Learning to use our photos with our creativity, not instead of our creativity. Ian Saxby is pretty accurate. I paint imaginary stuff the majority of the time. It's a matter of memorizing the shapes and their relationships to each other. Yeah. Can I check out Berserk art? I will love it. If I Google Berserk art, will that come up? I assume it will. I'll try and remember to do that, internet guy. Bro, okay. I'm not sure what I said to get that, but what times D? Can you just tell me again what that means? Barbara, I've watched vids from illustrators of graphic novels who all say they needed to draw from reality before. Okay, great. So you're confirming what I was saying, that in fact we need to put the right memories into our head, into our imagination, that form our imagination, so that we can go back in there and rummage around and find maybe a few different memories and put them together, combine them in a way that now brings it back out. We make the deposit, we make a withdrawal. Yeah. And often when I see drawings from the imagination, to my mind, having drawn intensely and trying to draw realistically from photos for some time now, for a few years now, I can see fundamental problems, and I can see what's happened is they've drawn what they. I mean, I normally say that what we need to do is not draw what we think we've seen, but to actually observe what we've seen. But I think in their cases, the memories haven't captured nearly enough information, but they don't realize that. And so they're not thinking they haven't got enough information of how the tree forms or how the branches go or this or that, or of any subject. And so the drawing ends up looking insufficient in some way. Often the proportion's wrong. I mean, so often when you look at drawings of faces, because we focus on the features, we often don't perceive this distance, and certainly from the side of the head, we don't perceive how much there is sort of between here and here. and all of that, or how the head sits on the neck exactly, especially from side on, because those things aren't as important in life when we look at people as focusing on their features. And therefore, people often draw the features correctly in relation, size, scale, all that to each other, but there's not nearly enough space here, or even here, or maybe here, and side on, kind of the depth is out of place, because we don't normally focus on that as much because it's not so important. We think we know how it looks, but the amount of, depending where the hairline is, the amount of, and the angle and all that, we actually haven't seen that enough with a focus on that in everyday life to have collected the information we need to draw it. And so we end up drawing what we think we've seen, even if those are memories that we're referring to. But it happens when people draw from photos. Most of the problems with drawings from photos are people haven't seen enough before they put the pen on the paper. I talked a bit earlier about 95% of the success of a drawing comes from the thought process. It's not 95% of the time, but the problem is when we see a drawing, we don't see any of the thinking. We only see the marks on the paper. And so it's easy to think that 95% of the important stuff is getting the marks on the paper and knowing the right way to do that. But what tells us the right way to do it is not a book of 5-minute hacks and tricks and tips, but it's coming to understand the process of translating one reality into another. And that's the hard thing. It's knowing what marks to put where, why, for what reason, and how the other things in the scene affect the marks that we're using. As I talked about, in these bush scenes, the marks I put up here often wouldn't make any sense except for the marks I have in other parts of the scene, and yet somehow combining them so that we create distinction between different parts. Now, this is one of the earliest kind of thick bush drawings that I drew, and it's just interesting seeing how my style has changed and using more lines involving. I really like this drawing. In using more lines, I like some better than others, and I've kind of taken to using a lot of lines now, and so it's interesting seeing that how this way of thinking has let me develop a number of different ways and styles and of capturing similar things, but with different levels of complexity. Here's a if we're talking about foliage and marks, this is part of the kitchen garden of Marie Antoinette's Hamlet on the grounds of Versailles. And so we have these little box hedges, little kind of 30 centimeter high box hedges, and then we have sort of a fence along here, and then we have all these different trees. And what I wanted to show was that so many of these trees were different types of trees. And so I need marks, I need values, I need silhouettes, and I need the effect of depth to in the way I combine them to make clear that these are all different trees. And one thing I often see in drawings again is that all the trees end up looking the same, end up looking very generic. Now, sometimes that's okay. I mean, if we look at this house here, now, this was like a 15-minute drawing, so it was quick and it was gestural. So we're not going to get bogged down in detail, particularly in things far away. But the trees were very important for not just the context, because they were there, but also because they really, from a visual point of view, cause a lot of drama, because they highlight the silhouette of the cottage in a nice dramatic way, and they push it forward, and just adds so much. It really makes a scene out of what would have just been a sort of a picture of the house otherwise. But look at those marks and how loose and quick they are at the back, because it's not what the drawing's about. So the context, the fact that these are support act background trees, means I haven't overworked them. If you look at these shrubs in the front, I mean, there's a rose bush here, and there's another rose bush here, and there's some, I think they're agapanthus or something. There's a few little things along the edge there. I've actually put way more detail into these little plants, that are like 50 centimeters high, or maybe a meter, than I have the giant trees at the back, because of where they are in the scene. So, when people say, oh, how do you draw this? How do you draw that? There is no how do you draw. It's like, what is it? But how does it fit in? How far away from it are you? What else is there? What's the focal point? What's the depth of plane for different things? What do you want to be the main thing? And so we manipulate our marks to create a scene that captures all those effects. And at the start, there's a lot to do. But we don't start at the end. We start and we get better. I mean, like, capturing the effect of the detail, that's what I did for this Swiss mountain scene. How did I draw the snow on the Swiss Alps? Well, I didn't. I just drew where there was mountain with no snow. And I used marks that would capture the effect of the shape of the mountain underneath. And I tried to manipulate the line thickness and the detail I drew in a way that would, for instance, make this look closer than up here, than there, which is the furthest away part. So I changed the way I mean, in some ways, this and this are pretty similar, except that there's a lighter line for the furthest part, but there is a little bit less detail. And so I'm changing the way I put the marks on the paper to create the visual effect of distance, because that creates the reality. If we look down the bottom, it was such a tangle of undergrowth that I really wasn't sure I'd be able to draw it effectively at all. And I was actually quite pleased with that. I don't know whether you think it makes sense or not, but from the challenge I had to draw it in the first place, I was quite happy with that. And I couldn't cut it out because I felt it was part of the framing of the mountain. And because this was so close, this very close bit of the grass is down here, if I captured the sense of closeness down here, then it would exaggerate, it would magnify the effective distance of the furthest part. So it's all about how we draw one part depends on the overall context as well. It's not just how do you draw a tree. It's not just how do you draw this type of tree and which marks will capture that. And it's not just how far away is it, but it's what's around it. All these things affect the decisions I make about drawing a tree. And if you haven't hit the like button yet, and this is helpful, this is interesting, please do that for me. And remember, I do have a trees playlist. It has about 70 or 80 videos on it, but it's very easy to see from the thumbnail what the demo is for. And so whether it's trees or branches or trunks or big trees or bush scenes, whatever, you can tell from the thumbnail really what it's going to be about. So you can choose whatever you think is kind of helping you get in the direction that you want. That would be good. How can I prove my drawing skills? Oh, thirds, that's bigger than I can say here. But I do have a lot of videos on that. One of my playlists is, I think it's called Tips or Advice for the Self-Taught Artist. And that's where most of my talk to camera ones go. And so quite a few of those have got like 5 things if you're starting to draw, 10 helpful things at the start of your beginning drawing journey and things like that. So have a look there. I can't really start saying things now with this. I actually think one of my live sessions was on 10 tips for beginner drawers. So if you want to look through the live playlist, there is one of these sessions on that. May even have been the first one I did. Berserk is a manga series. Okay, that rings a bell. I think I have looked up, but I think someone has already told me that my work reminded them of Berserk, and I looked it up and I realized it was a great compliment. Yeah, so and of course I've got no involvement with manga. I mean, I watched Astro Boy as a little kid, loved it in the 60s when it first came out, and but that's really my only manga experience. So I just love it when people in totally different genres find benefit from my work or my thinking. I just think it's this really, I just love the rippling out effect of creativity and people who would have nothing in common. I have a lot of tattoo artists who follow me because it's ink. It's freehand ink. And, that's not my world. I mean, I don't have any tats and, I don't look like the sort of person who would. But not that that tells you anything these days. But I just love the fact that what I do can help inform people whose worlds are totally different and their creative expression is totally different. And even what they work on is totally different. They're not working on paper. I just think it's fantastic. I love it. And especially, I guess, you know, to feel that when we're creative, we do have this connection with each other. And as someone who didn't do anything for so many decades, and then when I did do it, it was a very, very not isolated, but very individual journey. And I didn't connect with anyone else while I was painting and all those things. Yeah, it's just amazing. I just love it. I just love the fact that suddenly I have all this stuff in common with people at very different stages of life, but also very different things they're trying to bring out of their creativity and put into their drawing and their art and for different purposes. I just love it. I just think it's been such an exciting development for me from the whole social media thing, which again is another story, but a huge surprise. Who would have thought that? Um, hang on, how do I draw around white space, especially when drawing? How do I draw around white space? Maddie, if you look at a lot of some of my videos, where's the one of the steps? Because that's a recent, yeah. If you look at this video, you'll see that basically I do like a dotted dashed outline for the major sort of parts of the rocks and the steps. And then I use that as a guide. Now, I really do use it as a guide, and because as I start to fill in the value, see, I mean, I create these steps by the hatching, but I do have some dotted lines and sometimes little dashes as well as the dots to sort of provide an initial kind of working out where am I starting from. But if as I start to create the 3 dimensions, so I create the 3 dimensions by hatching to create the shadows. And look at this step here. Just imagine if I'd drawn a straight line or a solid line across there, a bit like maybe how I've got just there in that chipped bit. So sometimes, that can work because that harder edge reflects what's there because a bit of the rock's been chipped out. But where you have a section where all of these feet, for 150 years walking up and down these steps have taken the edge off, what marks will create the effect of that rounded edge. And I got to say, doing that takes a lot longer than just drawing a straight line across. But drawing a straight line across would create a very different effect. And if we go up further here, maybe to this step here, or maybe that step there, again, the way I put the marks on, and like there's a bit of a straight line there. Sorry, my fingernails are often dirty. I do a lot of gardening and I often pop out for 15 minutes and just pull some weeds up to stretch my back and stuff. And sometimes I get all this dirt under the fingernails and don't notice. I've had comments about how disgusting my fingernails are. So I do apologize. But if you look here, here is a straight line because this is a dark shadow in between a rock on top of another rock. So that's the effect it creates. Okay. And the same with further along on that, because we're looking more side on now at those rocks because they're higher. But you see how once we stop, when I think about shapes, then I'm going to draw straight lines and get very geometric slabs. When I think about capturing the effect, I'm seeing the weathered effect of the sandstone, and I'm thinking, what marks will capture that effect? And a straight line there won't capture that effect. I can use it, but I'm losing something about the scene that drew me to the scene in the first place. Again, you'll see over here, I've done something similar. I did this one after. I did this one after this one. So I learnt these lessons. I think it was after. They were pretty close. Anyway, you can see me exploring a theme anyway. But in terms of like leaf litter, so I'm trying to give the sense that there's lots of dead eucalyptus leaves here. Also that they're in sort of fair bit of shade, but also the slope of the ground there. So I've got this layering of things on top of things that I'm trying to capture the effect of. And then there is a shrub that stands up. Now it wasn't quite as black on white as I've done. I've exaggerated the effect so that you can see it more easily. In the photo, it was a bright enough green that the green made it stand out. Well, I didn't have that benefit, so I kind of made it brighter, as if it's catching the sun in a way that it wasn't. But I thought there was more gain doing that than being a slave to the photo. But again, you can see, with these rocks, I'm working out what lines capture the effect of the rocks. And the outlines of these large rocks, again, I've avoided doing a hard, solid line. Look at these two big rocks up here. You see, I haven't done a solid line. I've left gaps. And that reflects the fact that when we have a surface that's rolling away from us, imagine a sphere rolling away from us, and there's light coming on it, the perception of edge changes. But a sphere, of course, is perfectly regular. But particularly when you have a rock where there's, even if it's roughly circular, sort of bits come in and out, then those bits capture the light in different ways. And the edge doesn't quite look as solid all the way. There are bits that show more or show less. And so I've tried to capture that effect by leaving those gaps or having some parts of the line a bit heavier than others. So I find that, it's now all to do with capturing the effect. And so I've got to look at the effect and work out what it is. And if I'm in a rush, if I think, oh, well, 100% of the drawing is the lines, I better hurry and start putting lines on, then I'm not really drawing, I'm guessing. I've just suddenly now got a sheet of paper and I'm putting lines on, so sometimes it looks not much more than randomly, because I haven't focused on what I'm doing in the right way. I do have a playlist on observation for drawing. It's only got 4 videos on it. They're all early videos, so it's probably not as developed a mindset as I would have now. Maybe I should redo those videos because that was like 1,000 videos ago. But I think it's a helpful starting point, because a lot of the problems with people drawing is that clearly they haven't seen what they need to see, and then they haven't worked out now the best way to capture what I'm seeing in a form that I want to create for my overall drawing. AFK for a few minutes. Okay, GIMP is a free software equivalent. Okay, to Photoshop. Okay, thank you. Do I use masking tape to get the perfect? Yes. So it's not masking tape. I actually just use. Someone asked. I did a comment today about that. The tape I use sometimes, I use this one at the moment. It's just from a hardware store. It's tape. It's low adhesive tape from a hardware store that you use when you're painting and you don't want to get paint on, the glass or the skirting board. So it's just a low adhesive tape. Now, occasionally I tear my paper with it. I edit that out. And that's really annoying. And people have said one way to not do that is before you remove it, to just get a hairdryer and warm it, because that softens the tape even more and makes it far less likely to pull. The other thing I've noticed is that, scenes such as this, and I put tape all around it, the tape along the bottom is most likely to tear because I'm resting my hand on that more as I draw. So I actually press that down more. So I've also learned to be particularly slow and cautious along there. So But this is not some expensive special. This is like $3.50 Australian, which is probably 50 cents US dollars or something, the exchange rate. It's just really cheap. It's like, I think you have Home Depot. It's our Home Depot equivalent in Australia. It's called Bunnings, but it would be, yeah. So it's nothing special. Okay. And look, some of my drawings, I don't do that. I'm just looking for one here where I haven't used it. Yeah, I didn't use it in this one. So, yeah, I don't always use it. Yeah. A few more questions here. Do I draw on print papers? Like, no, I draw on 210 GSM paper. This is what I draw on. Here you go. It's a German paper that's imported into Australia and bound up into these. And I have A3, A2, and A5 pads that I use. So I really like it. It's a good. It works really well with ink. It works really well with these. If you look at the back, where's that tree that I had that I used the marker for? Oh, look, if I go to this drawing. See, so this is the back of this. This is actually a freehand drawing. This is the sort of drawing I did for my earliest YouTube videos, but they just took too long, and yeah, I had to make them so fast that it was just hopeless. But yeah, but on the back it goes through, but it doesn't go through to the page underneath. I mean, I tear them off anyway, but I've noticed that on the pad paper that I lean on when I do these, it doesn't go through to the paper underneath. So, oh dear, this is terrible, isn't it? Yeah. So again, there's a big tree. And look, you can see what I've done there. So it's a bit of a slightly different technique when I'm using the value. You can see, as in the marker, you can see that I've kind of highlighted some of the silhouette, because these trees had large leaves and they were fairly close. So I'm capturing the effect differently, and I'm able to use the values. So that eliminated a lot of hatching, but I still had to combine, line and mark, fine line of marks and lines. I had to combine that with this. And if you look at the building, the architecture, here we go. I'll just get it closer and hold it. Okay, that's it. I'm drawing the effect of the detail with the architecture as well. So I'm not trying to capture everything I could see in the photo. It's exactly the same principle that I'm using for the foliage. I'm looking at the overall effect, and I'm trying to capture that with marks that create the effect of what I see, not marks that capture copy the accuracy of what I can see in the reference. Because this building sits, Palace of Versailles, sits back from the garden in the front. And so the garden has to feel closer. And again, I'm manipulating my marks and how I put them on the paper to create the effect that I want, the effect of distance. And I partly exaggerate what happens in the photo because that will more create the effect that I want. To feed the barn cats. Okay. Because I don't want to waste nice papers because of my bad drawing. When people ask me what paper should they use, though, and what pen should they use, and I have a video on this, my answer is always use pens and paper that you can afford to waste, because nothing will retard our ability to learn drawing and to develop confidence and to explore and experiment than fear of wasting our paper or wasting our pens or wasting our watercolors or whatever. I shouldn't use paper that I can't easily replace, both from ease of getting it, but also from the expense. So, what you lose by having paper that you're scared to use is a lot more than what you lose by using cheaper materials. And particularly at the start, it really doesn't. The difference that expensive materials make is from negligible to not very much at all. When you start to become quite good, then it can start to make a little bit of a difference using more expensive materials, but not always. Absolutely not always. With oil paint, the better quality oil paints are, you can achieve better things because there's more pigment and more color pigment and less filler in the paints, and the oils are pure and stuff. But with drawing, not so much. You can do amazing things with a big pen, and there's no reason why not to. And if that lets you relax more, there's far more benefit in that. So again, if you've just joined, if this is interesting, please hit the like button for me. Maybe I'll get to 100 before we go. 5 minutes to go. Maybe not. Do I ever use brush pens to fill in larger areas of darks? Well, I mean, I did on this, but whoops. But this was a drawing that from the start I was going to use the pens, the marker pens for. Generally, no. If I'm doing a line drawing, I'm making the commitment at the start to do whatever lines are needed. But I said, an hour, 20 minutes for this one. And I mean, a drawing like this would have taken me 15 minutes to draw. This one might have been like 20, 25 minutes to draw. So as you become more familiar and comfortable with this, it does become faster, and it partly becomes faster because we can make our decisions faster, because with more confidence, because we understand the possibilities more, because we've experimented with them. One of the worst things we can do when we're drawing is to think we're producing artworks. And I don't say that to put down where we're at, but it puts such a pressure on us if I think I'm producing an artwork, because suddenly I'm afraid of ruining my artwork. And that inhibition is tremendously, it's just unsatisfying to begin with. But it's also very, very detrimental to learning to draw. When we learn to draw, we want to be free to experiment and try new things and take risks and to move boldly and to risk a line that may not work, because I need to learn how it feels to get it right. Well, I might need to do that 10, 20 times, but eventually I'll learn what the arm, the hand, the whatever pen movements are that create the line I want in the right way, that will create the effect I want with the accuracy I want. But it's only by being free to experiment. The more relaxed and confident we are, the better we will draw. And if we're thinking there's this pressure to produce an artwork, then if I'm learning to draw, if I'm learning the piano, I don't think that at the end of the first week I'm going to invite the neighbors in for a concert. But somehow, almost from the start of learning to draw, we do feel this pressure to produce an artwork, to have something that can be framed or given away, or at least shown off to people as an artwork. I'm learning to draw. Now, some things may turn out amazingly, but there probably won't be consistency in that for a while. And that's just what learning a skill is. There's nothing magic about drawing. We're learning a skill, developing a skill. And it's hard when we're doing it ourselves and having to choose what we look at. Nico saying, would you say it's better to practice architecture drawings by using a horizon line and perspective points, or just by consistent practice by eye to get the perspective correct? Look, have you seen my perspective playlist, Nico? Perspective is an ongoing tension for a lot of artists. If we draw from life or from photos, then we don't need to understand perspective. We can just focus on learning to see really clearly what's in front of us and to then capture that in our drawing. But in my personal experience, if we understand it, then when I am looking at life, whether it's a photo or whatever, when I am looking at my reference, I can anticipate what I'm going to see. And that lets me see it and understand it faster and more easily. And that's got to be an advantage now then when I go to actually capture that in whatever way I want to capture in my reference. And the problem is, I think, why perspective is such a problem for artists is that we watch YouTube videos and they're really not designed for a lot of YouTube perspective videos aren't actually very good because they don't tell you what they don't tell you. And you've watched it and you go away thinking you've understood it and thinking that's therefore equipped you to draw with perspective in life. And in fact, what they've shown you in the video is a very, very limited set of parameters. You know, it's a box on a flat plane. And if there's 2 or 3 boxes, they're either all on the same plane or they're at right angle planes and all the ground is flat. But if the ground goes up and down, if the streets curve, if the buildings are oriented at random angles, then it doesn't work the way it's made to look like it works on the video. And people think the problem is that they're not smart enough to understand the video, instead of realizing that's actually the video is being designed for architects, not artists. And probably the person who's just made this is just, not probably, but they might have even just copied it from another video and they don't really understand it either, but they've basically reproduced it. And so they don't appreciate the deficit in it for the drawing artist. So I've got a few perspective videos that are kind of, perspective in plain language, talking about the concepts of perspective generally. Okay. If anyone hasn't hit the like button, I'm 91. I don't think I've ever got to 100 before, so that would be sweet for me if that was the case. So please help me if you can. But it has one of the best art you can find. Just search it on Google. I recommend not looking into it too much. Just look it on Google. Okay, that's the Berserk drawing, is it? Do I have samples of drawing trees from above, looking down at a forest from above the tree line? I don't think I do, actually. I draw from my own photos so that I don't have copyright issues. And I just don't think I have any trees that I've yeah. I mean, there's quite a few lookouts around where I live, so I don't think it'd be hard for me to get those. So I'll see what I can do, because I mean, people often think, oh, I don't like drawing trees because of the perspective. There is perspective in everything we see. There is perspective with trees. That's exactly the same as the perspective with buildings. But because buildings are geometric, it's more obvious. And sometimes there are problems with the perspective not being correct with a tree or a bush or something for the rest of the scene. But again, it's the sort of thing where we may not be able to work out what's not right, but we can sense something's not quite right. That's fine, Mandy. Smitha, how do you know where to start a drawing? I drew one thing too big and the whole drawing got too big for my paper when I tried to. Okay. Yeah. Look, I have a number of videos on keeping proportion correct, and that's probably better than anything I can say now. And there have been some maybe in the last 2 or 3 months. There were a couple. So have a look back there. But look, the crucial things are what we start drawing with. The important thing is when I have I mean, I haven't got the photo for this on me, but what I start with is, I think, what can I draw most accurately, most easily, and if possible, but not always, roughly in the center. And so if there's something geometric, so with this, I actually started by drawing this section, I'm pretty sure, because there was really nothing down here is complicated because there's all stuff in front of the lower part of the church. And this I could draw, and I figured that was easy enough. So once I'd drawn that and got the proportions correct for that, now that gives me a reference for going up, and then I went up. And then once I'd drawn like this part of the tower, whoops, if I was happy with that, then I could reference the next part of the tower. So the more we draw, the more easily we can draw because we've got more to reference from. So I find that, and I keep saying I'm going to do a video on the tempo of drawing, but drawings develop their own tempo. And at the start, because we have no reference points on the paper and we have to establish them. And as you said, it's so important that we get the start right, because if we get the start not right, it will throw everything off, which is why we go even slower than we normally go at the start. And again, I see people just start really quickly and they don't get a foundation for an accurate drawing in what they do. And that's no good. It's just practice. But I would suggest that if you have a problem with things getting too big, then do smaller drawings. So I don't know what size you do, but if you draw on A4 and you can't control the proportions, then start drawing on A5, because it's easier to control proportions and to see them and judge them the smaller the scale. And so, if you can't manage them here, then start here. Because if you can't manage them here, you'll struggle to manage them here or on the larger sheets again. So that's, but as I said, I have some videos where I talk about what I kind of summarize there, and I sort of explicitly step you through it as I draw. And I also talk about aligning and things like that as well. So again, if anyone hasn't hit like, if I could get 5 more, that would be good. Market pad pages are amazing. Yep, but they often have very, very smooth paper, which is great for markers, but I find they're not so good for the sort of effects I want to capture with the line, because I want paper that has a little bit of tooth, so that I can get like light, that I don't get a dead even line, because I don't want a dead even line, because that does look very outline-ish and therefore cartoonish. Shokunin said, when I was really young, I also loved copying cartoon characters from anywhere I could. Yeah, absolutely. Is there a schedule to your live streams? Look, actually, that's something I did mean to talk about, my live streams. I'm wanting to try and get them a little bit more regular. And so my aim at the moment is to have one at 8:30 on Sunday night, my time, which is when this one started. So this has been going now for 2 hours and 7 minutes. Because I was a little bit late because I had trouble getting the Wi-Fi connection to work tonight. That's never happened before. But I'm very much aware that this time works better for Asia and Europe than it does the Americas. And so I'm also planning to redo this topic. I mean, it's not going to sound the same, but redo this topic on my Thursday morning at 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, where I basically kind of repeat the theme, but we'll see where it goes. But that's the time that's designed to be more user-friendly for the Americas. So if anyone's joined us who hasn't hit the like button yet, I only have 3 to go to get to 100. That would be great. I'd really appreciate that. So that's the schedule, JTY, that I'm hoping to have. Probably some of you have noticed that Sunday night, my time, this time is kind of the most regular time. But as I became aware, I actually have more YouTube watchers in America, in the US, than anywhere else. So it seemed sensible to do a time that was actually helpful. I don't know if anyone here is watching from America, but it's probably 3 a.m. I mean, it's a wide country, so there's lots of time zones, but it's probably 3 a.m. or something. Most perspective videos only show the first 10% of perspective. Yeah, I haven't watched too many of them, but the ones I have, helped me understand the weaknesses of them. The view from the Three Sisters lookout is my favorite. Yes, it's a great one, and I've certainly got lots around me that I can do. So I'll try and do that just to get some different views. In the US, Barbara's in the US having her morning coffee. It's 12:45 in New Zealand. Perfect time to draw and watch. Some people say that they listen to it later when they garden or something rather than watching it. 7:45 a.m. here in Oklahoma. That's sort of in the middle, isn't it? Is it? I think it's in the middle, or is it sort of on the eastern side of the middle? Midwest. Thank you. Yeah. Oh well, I'm glad there are some people in the Americas able to catch it. Oh look, I'm on 99, watching from Florida. It's 8:46 a.m. Gosh, you've got all of Sunday ahead of you, almost dead center. Yeah. I like geography, and at different times looking at where the US states are. Quite a bit of excitement there for you today. Like for all the controversy with your politics over there, it's just dreadful, what's happened today. So I do hope you all navigate through this. Okay, any final questions? Oh look, I just need one more person to hit the like button for me. There must be someone who's held back till now. Someone who's just tuned in. Do me a favor and let me go to bed. But are there any final questions about drawing trees in particular? As I said, thank you. Whoever did that, thank you. No, I think if you unlike it, goes back one. Thanks. Look, this has been really fun. I love drawing trees. I think you can probably tell that. I love trees. I've always wanted to be able to draw them. It's been a really, really wonderful part. 12:45 in Stockholm, Paris, and Berlin. Not been to Stockholm, but Paris and Berlin are both favorite countries to visit. I have great memories there, and quite a few drawings from there. Thanks, Amado. I don't speak, I have a little Spanish. I don't speak Portuguese, which I think is what you said. Okay, it's between 3 and 4, I think that is in Istanbul. Thanks, everyone. The world is an amazing place. But look, I hope this has given some encouragement to draw trees, and beyond that, I hope it's given some direction of drawing trees, and particularly kind of treescapes where it's not just a specimen tree next to a building, but it's something more complex. But I hope you've and if you've come in at the end, then you won't have possibly got this. But I said at the start, please go back and watch the start. But I said at the start that good evening, Gian. We're just about to finish. If you've just come in, I hope you've been around for a bit earlier than this. But I said at the start that I didn't realize that when I began that trees really were a trigger for me for understanding the drawing process differently, because they were so challenging to draw. I found my way of understanding what the process was inadequate, and my painting experience actually pushed me in a direction with my drawing, because I painted in oils before I drew, actually pushed me in a direction that opened up a whole new way of thinking and of understanding the drawing process that has actually benefited every subject I draw, not just foliage. So look, I hope these ramblings have been helpful to you. Hope you've enjoyed a bit of a kind of a whip through of some of my drawings. There's a lot here I didn't, but like even just like look at this tree. Okay, a bare tree, but I'm trying to capture the effect. And look, it's quite a bit of a thing to draw a bare tree with a building behind it. How do you draw the building behind it? Resist the urge to draw them on top of each other. Yeah, it's a little more fussy to favor the tree, and not just to draw the lines running through it behind. But you don't capture the effect that you get when you do that, is not the effect that we have in life. Sorry, I'm just trying to find a drawing that I thought I put out to possibly show, but I can't see it. But again, we have a hedge down here. We have a tree at the back here. We have a tree on the other side. But look at the thatched roof. You see, this whole scene, I've chosen marks to capture the effect, the visual effect of the objects. I haven't drawn a line around the roof, around the gables, on the edges. I've put marks that capture the effect of the materials, of the lighting, and also the emphasis of how, if you like, visually prominent that edge or mark or value is in the overall drawing, but also how much I want it to be in the overall drawing. So, thinking marks and building up layers of marks to create the effect that we want has been key now for drawing everything. Certainly very strong focus for the last probably 12 months at least. And I hope it's helpful for you too. Thanks, Red Angry Bird. That's great. Please tell your friends. You can help me by sharing my videos with friends. That really does work well for the creator. Send the link to someone else who who draws. But hey, thanks for joining me. And whatever you draw, whether there's trees in it or not, whether you use my approach to thinking or not, make sure you have fun, because then we all win if we have fun in the process. Yep. That's it, Ali. All right. Oh, thank you, Akia. I'd love to go and sketch in Istanbul. Yes, please don't skip the ads. That's helpful for me. Oh, look, I've still got 43 people watching. It seems a shame to go. I mean, this is more people than I often ever have at any point in the live session. I mean, people watch it afterwards, but seems such a shame. But I better go and get some sleep. It's 11 o'clock. So thank you. I'll see you next time. As I said, the next live stream will be this session again, this sort of topic. It's going to be on my time Thursday morning at 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So it's going to be basically 12 hours different to this one. So if you're watching this in the morning, it's going to be in the evening, or vice versa. If you're watching this at midday, it's going to be at midnight. So you probably don't want to watch that one. So that's the cycle I'm going to see if I can keep up. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye.